Hello Battletech enthusiasts. This is a audio update to my 7 categories of battle mechs. On also cover vehicles a little bit. Now that it's COVID and we're not really commuting to work, I can make a better audio. So basically, the 7 classes of mechs is going to be an update to the lecture series on various strategies and tactics. So basically, I think that there are 7 categories of mechs. The first kind is the Brawler. It generally will stay at a distance of 1 from the action, and it'll be the center of the action. It doesn't have to do a lot of damage, though a lot of Brawlers can do a lot of damage, but its main job is to soak return fire and to be the focus target of the enemy's forces. It can also engage the enemy's Brawler if they have one, which they usually do. But it should be tough and hard to kill, and have at least medium speed. It should not be very slow, although a Stalker makes a surprisingly good Brawler for the fact that it's very slow. It needs to be very tough, and firepower is optional, but many Brawlers tend to have a lot of firepower too. So the obvious choices are the Atlas and the Awesome. Awesome in particular because it has no ammo, so it can, and it has a Battle Fist if you play with the option for the Battle Fist. The Banshee is also good because it's just a big pile of armor, and it can punch, and you can kind of punch a mech's head off with it. Other good ones are the Stalker and the Grasshopper. Now, as you go to smaller mechs, you might choose a Wolverine or a Hunchback or a Centurion. A Hoplite and a Wolfhound are also really good. And for light mechs, a Commando can make a good one, and also the Locust, the LCT-1V variant, has a lot of armor, and it's very fast. So for just little micro battles of scouts on scouts, the Locust is not bad. Now, mechs that are not good, surprisingly, would be the Marauder, the Warhammer, and maybe even the Battlemaster. And the reason for those is they tend to be a little squishier than you'd want, or just a little bit under heat sinked, so they can't really go all out when they get point blank. And really, those have other purposes. Although a Warhammer might be able to pull it off, but you really want these to kind of stay in the back and be more support. Although they are pretty scary just by themselves too. For vehicles, you would go for the Demolisher as the primary choice. And the second tier choice would be an Ontos. And if you're doing little micro battles, you might go for like a Vedette or something, but it's not as good, or a Goblin. Those are not as good. Next class is the Bodyguard. The Bodyguard would be like from range 1 to 4 from the action. Not very far from the action, but not necessarily at range 1. That is because the purpose is to guard the Brawler and get back shots on the enemy Brawler, and keep other mechs away from your Brawler's backside. You want to like engage the other guy's bodyguards and the opponent's bodyguard in case they have some. And good ones for, well, pretty much any mech that makes a Brawler can also be a bodyguard. With a few bad choices. Like the Stalker, you would not pick as a bodyguard because it's just too slow. And also, you would not pick an urban mech as a bodyguard, even though an urban mech can also be a Brawler for micro battles for small mechs. But it would not make a good bodyguard, even though it has jump jets, because it's just so slow. Also, obviously, any LRM-based mech you wouldn't want as a bodyguard. But you could, in theory, use a PPC-based mech, like a Griffin, or even melee mechs, kind of like a Charger. Generals make good bodyguards because it has just a huge amount of weaponry that you can alpha strike on the back of the opponent's Brawler, even though it doesn't really have much armor, so it's kind of a squishy bodyguard. Locusts, Spiders, also good. So these are kind of what describes that. A tank version would be like a Vedette or a Goblin. Okay, the next, range support. Basically, the job of the range support is to kill steal and do range DPS if you're kind of thinking in terms of like online raid games. And you want to be in like range 10 to 14 from the action. That is, you want to be outside range 9, which tends to be like the nastiest weapons, like autocannon 20s and medium lasers. You want to be in like the long range weapon medium range. So range 10 to 14 is good. And examples are longbows, catapults, riflemans. A griffin or a marauder can also be range support. For clan mechs, the Mad Dog is an ideal range support mech. For vehicles, the best is the LRM carrier, and then after that are the PPC carrier and the Partisan. And there's the AC-5 and the AC-2 version, but the AC-5 is better for range support. AC-2 is better for anti-aircraft. We'll talk about that later. For light mechs, you can do like Thorns and things like that. Very small mechs, Valkyries. Now, spotters are the next class. They're not supposed to fight. Their purpose is just to move fast and move at the maximum speed possible and do not engage and guide LRMs into targets. If you're using your weapons, it means you screwed up somehow, or you're taking shots of opportunity from the back or out of range of return fire. Carnobs, Warriors, Savannah Masters, Swiftwinds, and Infantry make great spotters. The bad spotter is a Jenner or an AC-20 Karnov. Why? Although they are fast, they have other features which are good, like they have heavy firepower. They're too costly. A spotter has to be cheap. You want a spotter because you're not going to be engaging with your weapons, so you want to like just have it be a cheap spotter only. Also, you can use it as a sync for initiative. And if you don't know what the mission is, you might want to consider a spotter with hands or with anti-infantry capability like machine guns and flamers, so the spotter isn't completely useless if you don't need to spot anymore. The next class is the Hunter. This has to have a high firepower and a high speed. Usually your armor will be on the lighter side, but it'll be heavier than the targets that you go after usually, which would be one class smaller than you. There are a few exceptions. It's like an example of heavy hunters would be dragons. Like more mid-sized hunters would be like cicadas and assassins. An assault hunter would be like a Zeus, and a light hunter would be a Jenner. A subclass is the pack hunter, which would be like a large class of a pack of locusts, like 3 or 4 locusts together, or like a pack of warrior helicopters, or a pack of Savannah Masters. There you have high speed, and you're guaranteed to flank with some of them because they come in a pack. And because you only have, even though each one is lightly armored, there's too many of them, so the enemy can't shoot them all. The next kind would be the space control, or anchor mech. It can threaten a large area. It can shoot at anything that comes in into range into that large area, but it's sufficiently nasty that you don't want to close in on it. You don't want to come close and fight it one-on-one. So you can't use something like a longbow or a catapult as a space control mech, because if the enemy wants to, they'll just charge up and engage at point-blank range, and then the longbow is kind of wimpy at close range, and the catapult can fend for itself a bit, but it's still kind of a waste. Another example would be an LRM carrier you would not use as a space control, even though it can hit a large range, because you just run up some locusts against it, and that'll be the end of your LRM carriers. So really good options would be the Battlemaster, the Marauder, Warhammer, and for really small mechs, it would be like the Urban Mech, because it's kind of scary with that AC-10. And also for tanks, it would be like the Manticore, because it would be like nasty at all ranges, and you don't really want to get up to it. The good feature, or a feature, of space control and anchor mechs is that they're generally balanced in their ranges, except for the Urban Mech, it's kind of specialized. But you don't have to move much, because you basically just need to get into the position that you're going to play in, and that's it. It'll stay in that position for the rest of the game. Maybe to guard a target, or guard a waypoint, or an objective or something. Then the last class are the specialized niche mechs. These serve just one purpose. They're really awesome at that one function, but they're not great otherwise. For example, like a fire starter or an AC-2 Partisan. Those are awesome at their purposes. The Firestarter is awesome as anti-infantry, but it's kind of soft against other mechs, and you kind of tend to, you see all these weapons on it, and you imagine you can face up against a larger mech, but you can't because you just don't have any armor. And the AC-2 Partisan, it's the perfect anti-air tank, but its AC-2s are only good in the end game. But that is actually something you can do with it. You can park it on a hill, and then as mechs start losing armor, it starts crit seeking. But otherwise, it's not that great, so it's a specialized mech, or tank. The Cyclops, it's also kind of specialized. It's a very large mech for what you get for the battle value. But it's great if you play with the command bonus quirk, because it's sort of like a story mech in a way. It's meant to be where the commander sits and has a hollow map of the whole battlefield and can command the other mechs around. So that's kind of the story purpose of the Cyclops. It's not really meant to be a competitive mech otherwise. Also, Phoenix Hawks are kind of squishy. Anything that's a lamb or is sort of a specialty mech, it's too squishy and too little armor, too little firepower for the cost, because that lamb mechanism costs a lot in battle value. So anything that's lamb is specialized niche. Other interesting specialized niche units are the SRM carrier, which is an awesome ambush vehicle for cities, and the Hetzer, which is sort of like an ambush vehicle, also not quite as good as the SRM carrier, but it's kind of like a poor man's demolisher. And then also pretty much any hover vehicle is going to be mostly, you can consider it as specialized. It's very squishy for motive hits, but for support or ranged or transport or a few purposes, it's great. Now, not quite a specialized niche, but almost there, would be something like the Striker. It's got LRMs and SRMs, so it can sort of guard LRM carriers against smaller threats like locusts, but it's got the LRMs so it can augment the LRM carrier's firepower. So that's pretty much it. Those are my opinions. If you have other ideas or have disagreements on use, please leave comments and subscribe if you can, so you'll get updates. I will be updating some of my older vlogs so that the audio quality is better, and I'll start with the most popular ones like this one and then move on down the line. Thank you.